The diversity, but especially the inclusivity agenda, is now becoming standard practice across most, if not all, work environments. It is now standard practice to be intentional about making sure that our workplaces are accommodative of our different cultural backgrounds, our different belief systems, and that gender balance is achieved. While that has seen massive reception with organizations diversifying their workplaces, calls are increasing to recognize a need to sensitize various forces of different disabilities and how people with these limitations can be welcome and accommodated by colleagues. Research has shown that disability awareness plays a key role in creating a workplace that is inclusive for all. By raising awareness of the experiences and needs of employees with disabilities, leaders can create a more understanding and supportive environment for everyone. But what of where the biggest barrier to this being achieved is a stigma against all forms of disability? You may be aware of the words that are used in our culture to describe disabilities like cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, mental health challenges, and many others. How then do organizations prep staff to be warm towards their colleagues who may be facing these impediments so that they too may feel their contributions are appreciated, but more so that they are supported to make them? We speak to disabilities activist Leslie Balisane, founder of Abilities, which is a media project aimed at bringing together organizations and champions of disability awareness for relevant discussions and education on disability. Leslie, thank you so much for coming on First Issues and affording us your time. We're talking today with you about disability sensitization in the workplace, but let's start here. As a culture that has stigmatized all manner of disability, where do you think or how do you think we can raise awareness around disabilities?
Thank you so much for having me. I think initially it starts with the community, the disability community, in terms of their representation out in the public space. A lot of awareness would be real interactions. If we are interacting with a person with a disability and I'm getting to know all there is to know through them, that's awareness. That's how you shift perceptions. You know, if I'm a person with a disability and I'm trailblazing and I'm doing all these beautiful things, a person can capture that from me and they're able to know better. The other way we can go about it is content and coverage through media, through your socials, and deliberately curating content that will shift perceptions, covering disability in a positive light, you know, in a way that just taps into people's cognitive domains enough to know better, you know, about disability. And just inclusion, generally, anything that you do, there's a concept called universal design. This means everything that I'm doing, whether it's an activity, it's a program, or it's a building, can everybody access this, and everybody inclusive of persons with disabilities. So we need to be deliberate with that inclusion, because then you get to know people. If we segregate, if there's the us and them, that means the other group doesn't know about the other group. So let's be deliberate with mainstreaming, with inclusion and representation.
Let us speak specifically of the cultural aspect of our dialogue. Do you think that the perception of disability being an inability and people of disabilities being belittled has shifted?
The perceptions about disability and the cultural views are shifting, but slowly. I mean, the strong bit is that culturally, historically, and systematically, as a country, Botswana, we are quite discriminative. And now the new generation, we inadvertently inherit those from the older generations, because remember, this is embedded in our culture, in our values. So, you know, you have to be challenging a cultural belief or a cultural system to know better. So yeah, it is changing, but it could be better. I mean, in the era of information and in the era of now, persons with disabilities getting their voices, because remember, the segregation also makes the persons with disabilities to believe whatever it's been said, to believe however I'm viewed. If you tell me something often enough, I'm going to believe it ultimately. So it is changing, but it could be better. But in the era of information, in the era of connectivity to the internet, we get to know what the best practices are, and then, you know, we try to implement that even locally.
You were talking earlier about inclusivity and accessibility, actually, and studies and research is or are increasingly calling for sensitization around disability in the workspace. But my question to you is, be that as it may, why has it taken so long for that to be standard practice, especially here in our country?
I think it will go back to the cultural component. If we innately view disability as lesser of a being than the next person, then you don't get really motivated to make the needed changes, the accommodations needed. Also, that we have never gotten used to maybe spending money on reasonable accommodation. Reasonable accommodation means doing what's necessary for the other person who may have a disability to participate at an almost equal level or at a satisfying level. I'll give an example. A blind person needs software to be able to read, a visually impaired person. That software could be JAWS or screen reader, various them, and it comes at a cost, so you have to buy that software. But because we've never gotten used to be like, no, I can't spend money for somebody else, it becomes a bit of a challenge. So it has the bottom line that, oh, now we have to spend cash to be able to accommodate somebody. So I think the view, our cultural influence, you know, the focus on the bottom line, maybe of profits, and then just the lack of knowledge of, because it's actually quite, it could be better, because if you tap into the abilities of persons with disabilities, you can actually get the most out of your environment, out of your workspace, you know. And also just, you know, businesses are losing out on markets, on valuable markets, because they don't want to be inclusive. I'll give an example of maybe a sign language interpretation. If you're a service provider and then you leave out your information, I mean, your information is not accessible to the deaf community, it means they can't come and use your service. That's the deaf community and everybody connected to it. So yeah, I think it's taking long because it's a new way of life, and change it's scary. We're so used to our cultural view of disability, which is mostly charity-based, that now we're finding change a bit challenging to be inclusive to persons with disabilities.
Would you say there has been enough education around disability to lift the stigma around it?
I mean, given there's efforts, there's commendable efforts. I don't want to be morbid with all the disability status here in Botswana, but I also have to be truthful in terms of the observations. I mean, there's been efforts, but I think the challenge will also be where if the effort is coming laced with that attitude or the cultural component of like, oh, somebody needs to do this. You know, feeling a bit pity or whatnot. You know, like we're missing out on the equality, the humanity of the persons with disabilities. So there is awareness in terms of dialogue happening, in terms of various DPOs. These are organizations of persons with disabilities going out there doing their advocacies, doing their activities, and even the media. I mean, comparatively from years back, if various media houses, if shows like this are deliberate with saying, let's capture disability content, you know, within our space, like let's have a quarter, let's like say maybe every other week we make sure there's a disability story, and it's not just a disability story that it'll be soapy or segregate persons with disabilities more. It's insightful information, it's education, you know, learn hacks like information for disability, like, you know, how wheelchair users, a person wouldn't know that it's offensive to lean against with somebody else's wheelchair, or just hang your jacket there, or but if there's somewhere where they interact with that contact, there's information shared about that, it shifts how they view disability or what they know about it. So there is some awareness, but like where we are, honestly, it can be better. But kudos to the DPOs with their efforts in terms of their advocacies and awareness activities.
What would you say is the one greatest thing that needs to be done to achieve total and complete inclusivity of or for people with disabilities within various work environments?
I think the major thing would be attitude change. I mean, attitude can be a barrier, it can be disabling. You'd probably have like your disability, there may be a deformity somewhere, and you are able to operate or function, but because of maybe the attitudes that you would face from people, because of our perception of disability, it can disable you. But above everything, the approach, let's change our approach to disability issues. Botswana historically, it follows a charity-based model of disability, but the best way is to get a human rights-based model of disability. The value of humanity is diversity. Now, if we put that in our minds, knowing that human beings are different, and we incorporate that into our programs, into our policies, into everything, without knowing that that's the value of humanity, everybody is diverse, and we use universal design to allow everybody access, that will significantly reduce the stigma and just the attitude towards disability. I mean, it's so sad because sometimes it's coming from a good place. I'll give an example. This is real because it was captured on the media, that the ministry of a ministry was like, we will sit down with institutions, with colleges and universities, and ask them to reduce the cut down the cut-off points for access into those universities, into higher institutions of learning. And everybody was clapping for that, like, ooh, but like, except for me, I was like, no, why are you breeding that quality of persons with disabilities with sort of like lower? Why isn't the approach intensified where let's give everybody equal access to education so that we groom learned persons with disabilities, as opposed to maybe being mediocre with the education and then asking higher learning institutions to allow them in even if there hasn't been good performance. So is the attitude, it will be coming from a good place but a bit misinformed. Currently in Botswana, some financial institutions, but it comes from a higher level because they have a regulator, they discriminate against persons with disabilities because of their disabilities, where I'm banking with you, but if you need access to your money, you are a grown adult in your 30s, but because you are disabled, I ask you to bring a caregiver or your next of kin so that you can come and access your money. It's offensive. And you can tell when it was initiated, it was like, maybe we need to protect persons with disabilities so that they don't, it just proves a lot of misunderstanding in terms of that. So let's change, let's have the human rights approach to disability. Let's have the human diversity concepts in our minds in approach to disability, and that may just significantly reduce the segregation we see.
This program was brought to you in association with First National Bank of Botswana.
FNB, how can we help you?